Right, we'll get started. This is a public hearing of the Governance Committee, but we still need to start with the required statement to be read since it's a virtual meeting. So I'll proceed with that now. Pursuant to the Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's Emergency Order dated 3/16/2020. The Governance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the Governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during the meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting, please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. And as we have in the past, we'll start with a roll call. So I'll start with Mr. Engel.
Present.
Mr. LeBeau.
Present.
Mr. McKechnie.
Present.
And Sam Tyler, I'm here. All right, get that out of the way. So welcome to the Governance Committee's second public hearing on August 9th on the Article 9 and Article 10 of the annual town meeting warrant. This is the budget development article. I'm Sam Tyler, the chair of the Governance Committee. With us are members Paul LeBeau, former town administrator, Scott McKechnie, who is former finance committee member, Len Engel, planning board, community preservation committee, and Tina Lingham, who's also on our board, committee is engaged right now with international guests for a conference that she's running, so she couldn't join us tonight. This is, I think, a good time for a hearing on this matter. The Finance Committee report has been released. We're 5 days away from town meeting. There have been some inaccurate statements and misconceptions about the budget articles. So hopefully this meeting can help clarify, what we're recommending. And I'll start with a brief introduction, and other members of the committee will explain also briefly in parts of Article 9, Article 10, and then we'll open the meeting up to questions and proceed. So about the Governance Committee, consists of 5 members with diverse professional backgrounds and prior experience in Holliston government. Collectively, I think we represent over 100 years of municipal experience. Each member volunteered for this committee and was appointed by the Select Board with no preconditions. Each has demonstrated a high degree of integrity in their professional and public work in town. Our term is for 3 years for the committee, during which we have total discretion in terms of the issues that we choose to address during that time. And this is just the first of a number that we've identified that we want to research and come back to town meeting with recommendations. Given our experience, and we are sort of certainly aware of the challenges facing municipal government. It's more challenging, more demanding, requiring greater efficiency to meet service demands, changing conditions with limited revenue growth. And then with that, Holliston, its budget this year, fiscal 21, totals about $64 million and supports a workforce of about 795 employees on a full-time equivalency basis. So it's not a small town operation by any means. Towns, other towns that we've looked at, which has been pretty extensive, have responded by increasing trained professionals in town management and related governance changes. Holliston has not undertaken sort of a comprehensive review of its governance structure and efficiency for over 40 years. And frankly, it's our time to modernize local government and I think this is the first step that we're taking to do that. So we're often asked what led to this budget recommendation. Well, first we started off with extensive research of bylaws and charters of other towns in Massachusetts. We identified a number of comparable towns, and from that group, we put together a list of 15 towns that also had budget development bylaws in their charter. And so with those 15, and they're comparable in a lot of different ways, but we've developed personal relationships with the town managers, town administrators, or finance directors, whatever, the person best able to help us, so that we learn more about the town than we could learn just from reading bylaws or charter. And that's been very informative in terms of how other towns operate, which we have used in terms of formulating our recommendation. We decided early on to basically tackle the issue of budget development as our first of many different issues we'll deal with for a couple of reasons. First, Holliston's bylaws are relatively silent on the topic, which has led to tension among some boards, committees, and department heads. The hiring of a new town administrator last year with direct experience in municipal finance was a factor. And again, the committee's extensive review of charters and bylaws and working with other town officials in other towns. Our primary recommendation really is to modernize the budget process by placing responsibility for the town budget planning and development with the town administrator and the very experienced financial team. The town administrator would also compile a comprehensive operating budget and a 5-year capital plan with help of a new capital planning committee. The Finance Committee will continue to play its extremely important role of exercising the advisory statutory role of reviewing the budget and making recommendations to town meeting. So with that brief introduction, I'll call on or ask Scott McKechnie to take us through the budget development recommendations.
Sure, thanks, Sam. I just wanted to point out one thing, and a great intro. The last time that this was done in the town of Holliston 40 years ago, the budget was about $10 million. Today it's $65 million. So it's drastically different. And as you said, it's a very important procedure. And it's a procedure that that many towns that we talk to have incorporated every 5 to 10 years, a review of their governance. And so Holliston's silent on that. So we're a little behind, and we're certainly catching up. And I think this is important. But that said, the quick summary, I've got 11 bullets. I'll try to keep it quick because it is rather extensive, the process. So early in November, the stage is set with a summit meeting, and attending would be the chairs of the select board, finance committee, school committee, or their designee, the town administrator, the superintendent of schools, and the school finance officer. From there, the town administrator would set completion dates for all the phases of the budget process. The town administrator would then send out budget guidelines to all the departments, all while incorporating input from the select board and the finance committee. All departments would submit draft budgets, operating and capital, to the town administrator within agreed upon timeframes. And from this point, it would give the town administrator a holistic view of the overall budget, which is critical. The town administrator will review the budgets with the various departments and submit a draft to the select board no later than 110 days before the town meeting. From there, the select board has 30 days to review and adopt the budgets that are under their jurisdiction, with or without amendments. Town administrator would then transfer the budget along with the budgets that were approved by the school committee and the independently elected boards to the finance committee for their independent review. This would give the finance committee approximately 80 days to review the draft budget. During this time, the finance committee will perform their independent review of each budget. Once complete and within an agreed upon timeframe, the finance committee will file a report with the town administrator that includes the recommendations on the proposed budgets and the other warrant articles. Prior to the final adoption of the budget by the select board and the finance committee and the town administrator shall get together and review the recommendations. From here, the select board would adopt the budget that will be presented to the town meeting, noting that the finance committee will present its recommendations to the town meeting and be given the first opportunity to propose amendments, if any. What I didn't put in here, because there were several times throughout this process, that there will be public hearings, which should enable and ensure complete transparency throughout the process. So that's the Cliff Note version of the budget process. And I think that sums it up nicely.
Okay, thank you. Next would ask Lynn Engel to talk about the changes to the finance committee bylaws.
Sure, Sam, thanks. So the Finance Committee bylaw, current bylaw, is changed slightly, primarily to address the new roles and responsibilities and to shift those from the Finance Committee bylaw to the budget development bylaw that Scott just referenced. So the key provisions of the Finance Committee bylaw, the one that establishes their responsibility to, I'll quote here, consider any and all municipal questions for the purpose of making reports or recommendations to town. That's FinCom statutory responsibility, and that remains in the Finance Committee bylaw. The provisions that are shifted over to the budget development bylaw are the collection, the review of all the data and information from other town boards, committees, and departments. That still gets sent to the town administrator, and it also gets sent to FinCom as they take up their review of the budget. Their responsibility in the current bylaw to set the date or to set the schedule is shifted to the town administrator, as Scott referenced. It's part of the town administrator's responsibility now to develop that. And at the end of the current bylaw, Finance Committee bylaw, is a provision that that is shifted to what is now a new bylaw for let me get for an electronic talent bank. And that responsibility is shifted to the select board to manage and operate a talent bank, which will provide town residents an opportunity to understand what committees and boards are available for them to contribute to the town. And that is the Cliff Note version of the Finance Committee changes, committee bylaw changes.
All right, then we'll move to Paula Bowe, who's been our spokesperson on the town meeting changes that we've just recommended.
Thank you, Sam. What we're proposing under Article 10 of the warrant for the town meeting next Monday are some changes to Article 1 of the general bylaws, which covers town meetings. The two major changes are that we are proposing that the May annual town meeting, which is currently scheduled for the first Monday after the first Friday, be changed to simply the second Monday. In effect, that the difference in any given year means that it'll be about 3 or 4 days later than usual. which allows a little bit more time for the budget process to unfold leading up to the annual town meeting. The second date change is in October. The town annually has an October town meeting. Currently, the bylaw says that it shall be the last Monday in October, unless that Monday is a holiday, in which case it would be the fourth Monday. We've suggested just making it the third Monday in October. So that moves it forward at least a week, which we think is helpful because at the end of the calendar year, after the fall town meeting, there is a lot of work that has to be done by the financial team to prepare the tax rate and get approvals from the state on all the budgeted items and revenue projections. And then tax bills have to be issued no later than December 31st. So historically, that's been a big time crunch for those folks. And this will take a little bit of pressure off of it. We're not proposing any change to the date of the annual town election. That would remain the same as it is now. We are also proposing in our Article 1 bylaw changes that we clean up or clarify a little bit the language regarding the citizen petition process to get an item on the agenda or the warrant for the town meetings. It's a statutorily defined process, but basically it means that a group of citizens, 10 in May or 100 in October, can petition to have an item placed on the agenda for town meeting so that the town can consider whether or not to take action on it. Other than that, there are just a few grammatic changes and one typo change at the end of the article. It says that currently it says that no new business can be taken up at a town meeting after 1 Roman numeral 1 p.m. So we thought we'd change that to 11 p.m. Make it easier for people to find that time on their clock or their watch. And I think those pretty much highlight the Article 1 town meeting changes that we're proposing for Article 10 of the warrant for the town meeting on this coming Monday.
Thanks. I think Tina would have talked about Article 3, which is Select Board, where in 3 instances of small sections dealing with appointments, legislative special acts have been added, basically recognizing that with the town administrator bylaw, there's a role that he plays, or that position plays, in the appointment of the police chief, fire chief, and highway supervisor. In that the town administrator screens candidates and submits finalists to the select board for approval. So that's just there to make sure that's followed. And as Paul mentioned, there's a new section in Article 3 which basically creates the talent bank, electronic talent bank, which will hopefully be very successful in helping residents or registered voters understand what's available and what the responsibilities are, and also to be able to put their name in to the talent bank as to positions they'd be interested in, because this is a town that has, as Mary Greendale, who's also on with us, knows, is a lot of different committees, and this hopefully will help ensure that they're well populated with members who will serve the town. So that was our brief introduction of Article 9 and 10. We have a few people on who, if any have questions, this would be the time to do that. Dan, I'm not sure if your white hand is waving at me or if that's because you want to ask a question. Neither, I guess. It's going to be a short public hearing if we don't have people that are interested in asking questions.
No, my hand isn't up right now. I mean, if you'd like me to break you with some questions, I can, but I was really more hoping to hear back from, see what other citizens had to say tonight.
Yeah. Well, actually, we've heard from you twice already in our meetings. And I should say that that's something we have done. You know, we've extensively we've had 28 meetings altogether just on this issue. This will be the second public hearing beyond that. But that's been helpful. We've had like 2 sets of meetings with town officials or committees, you know, the select board, the finance committee, school committee, the finance officers, town administrator, town moderator, town clerk. And each of those, I mean, they've been very helpful. And we've made a number of changes in our original draft, and all through the process, we've made changes reflecting what we heard. And so it's been, I think, a better package, if you will, as a result of the meetings. And that's the purpose of this meeting as well. So, and I know you have questions, Dan, and there doesn't seem to be anyone else that's asking questions right now. So why don't we get started with you?
Well, I didn't really come with a whole bunch of new questions. You know, again, I think that you guys have made some changes, and a few of them have been you know, tweaks for the better. But you know, I still I've watched some of your meetings, and there still seems to be a hesitancy by the committee to just simply state that that it would be the select board budget that is presented at the town meeting. And you know, it's stated pretty clearly within the proposal that is the case. So you know, I'd like to hear from you and see if for some reason there's a disagreement with that, because some of the statements that I've heard don't mesh with what's actually in the text.
Well, I think I mean, in terms of reading the articles, we are proposing that the town administrator, you know, be much more responsible for the development of the budget. So it's not, it would be more of a budget prepared by the town administrator and the financial team after, you know, extensive meetings, consultation with the finance committee on an ongoing basis. We've already seen that in the time that Travis has been town administrator, which, you know, his collaborative work practice. So there's no expectation that would change, that there would be an ongoing collaborative approach in developing the budget. But it would be the town administrator's budget that would be submitted by the select board. But
well,
the select board.
That's not what this says, though, Sam. I'm on section 3 of Article 10, so under select board action. And just to read right from, I'm reading, I got it's the finance committee report, but obviously it's the warrant. This is exhibit B. The budget to be acted upon by town meeting shall be the budget approved by the select board with the accompanying recommendations of the finance committee. The select board shall be responsible for submitting the proposed operating budget to town meeting. That says nothing about the town administrator. Obviously, earlier in there, it does talk about the town administrator preparing things, but I just don't understand why you guys will not just say, yes, it's the select board's approved budget that goes to town meeting. It's what's in your document. So it really amazes me.
Well, I think you got to be practical in terms of how it's actually going to work.
No, but Sam, this is
you're
the law.
You're not going to have the select board.
Sam, this is the
dealing
law.
with-
This is what you're writing.
You're not going to have the select board, you know, going through all the details of a budget. They're going to rely on the town administrator for that.
But you
And
don't.
that's
You
his
can't
expertise.
legislate. You can't legislate an intent that's not actually put into the proposal. You can't say, okay, this is what we put in here, but that's not really how we think it's going to work. How it's
No.
really that's people are. This is law that you're writing, and it's just that's not a good way to write law. If what you want is to say that the select board shall approve the town administrator's proposed budget, well, that's a different thing. And it still doesn't totally solve all the issues, because the town administrator, again, 6B, not going to go out to Washington Street and tell anyone to be shot, but 6B does say that the select board can basically tell the town administrator different actions to take as far as town administrator goes. So I just, if what you're saying is your intent, well, that's not what's actually written in your document. And that's not what, and we're voting on the words that are in your document, not your spoken intent. And that to me is a huge red flag for this, because I'm not sure that this document that you've written, it doesn't reflect your intent, or what you're saying is your intent is not really what you wanted to do, and so you're just sort of ignoring those portions of your document. So
No, I don't think that's valid at all. I mean, I think it's.
I'm just reading the words from your document, Sam.
Yeah.
I'm not making any. I'm not changing anything. I'm just quoting you from your document.
And that, I mean, it would be the select board that would present it, but they're presenting.
No. This is budget
budget.
approved by the select board. This is not a presentation. This is the budget
No.
that is approved by the select board and then submitted to town meeting. Not presented, approved by. That means that they have to go line by line and vote on every budget, including the school's budget, including every independent budget in town. They will have to vote on that. I mean, have you guys not considered the practical implementation of this and what these words say and how we do things now? Because this means that at the end of the day, after all the budgets pass through the select board and to the finance committee makes the recommendations to the select board, and then the select board will go line by line and have to approve every single budget that goes to town meeting. This is what's in your document.
Well, that's your opinion. I don't.
No.
I don't
This
agree
is
with
the
that
words
opinion.
in your document.
Paul,
Sam.
you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, Paul LeBeau. You're focusing on that particular part of the proposed bylaw, Dan, and I don't disagree with what you say it says. You've quoted it accurately.
Okay, thank you.
But congratulations.
I'm glad we can agree on one thing here.
By the way, I watched the finance committee meeting the other night, so I think the moderator should be alert to watching to make sure you don't raise your hand twice. But there are also other provisions in that bylaw which talk about how the selectmen will not change the budget requests submitted by other independently elected boards. And the bylaw also talks about how the finance committee's recommendations are going to go to town meeting as well. So it's not just a select board budget that is presented to the town. There are the finance committee recommendations that also will go to the town. And there's language in the bylaw that says that the select board are not in a position to alter the budgets of independently elected boards and committees.
And you're right. You're right that it does say that early in the budget process, at the very beginning. So the town administrator gets all the budgets and compiles them, which is ministerial. I think we disagree on that, but anyway, compiles all of them, puts them into a budget, sends them to the select board. The select board sort of sees the whole enchilada, right? Makes any changes to its own budget and passes them through to the finance committee. The finance committee then has 80 days, I guess, to make its recommendations, which it then submits back to the select board. But it's at that point that the select board needs to come up and finalize a balanced budget. And it's at that point where if the budget isn't balanced, and I'm picking on the schools here, but let's just say the school that, there's 2 million of incremental revenue in a year, and the schools, asked for $5 million, right? So you're $3 million in the hole. Well, who's going to tell? I mean, someone's going to have to vote to balance that budget, and the budget to be acted upon by town meeting shall be the budget approved by the select board. That means at the end of the process, before the budget is sent to town meeting, the final votes on the budget will be made by the select board, and the select board absolutely, per this document, will have, maybe it's not your intent, and if it's not your intent, then again, that's an issue, but then the select board will absolutely vote on independent board budgets if necessary to balance the budget, because you have to go to town meeting with a balanced budget.
Yeah, but it's Paul LeBeau again. But I think you're also skipping over the part where the bylaw says that the finance committee's recommendations also go to town meeting.
But those are just recommendations. It's not our recommended budget will go to town meeting. So it's not our, it's just, we'll be able to say, yes, we agree with this. No, we don't agree with that. We don't, we would do this, we would do that, which, as is also noted in here, the select board has the option to ignore or not, accept or whatever. So, again,
That's always been the case, Dan. It's highly unusual, but it's always been the case that, especially in the case of an independently elected committee, if they don't agree with the recommendation of the finance committee, they can go to town meeting and ask for a different amount of money, and town meeting can make a decision.
Yeah, but ultimately the finance committee will have potentially reduced the request to its recommended level, right? And that's all I'm saying. The select board now has that ability, that authority.
No, I don't think that the selectman has the authority to unilaterally reduce the budget of an independently elected board. Ultimately,
I don't know how else to read that the budget to be acted upon by town meeting should be the budget, the whole entire thing. Approved. That's a vote by the select board.
My suggestion is to read it along with the rest of the.
No, well, of course I have, Paul. Of course I have.
I'm saying, let's not focus on one small piece. Let's look at the.
Well, but this is a very critical piece. I mean, you can't say we're gonna just look at the Constitution and not look at Article 2, right? I mean,
I'm not saying to ignore it. I'm just saying look at it as a whole.
Well, I am, and this is as a whole throughout the process. This is that final funnel before getting to town meeting. That's my point. You've done all the work to get to here, but somebody's got to make that final recommendation to town meeting, and and they've got to make a balanced budget recommendation to town meeting, and so somebody's got to choose. And then yes, town meeting can absolutely, there can absolutely be a fight over it at town meeting. That's not to say that these are the final decisions, but you will have a board that has a significant budget interest, ultimately having to approve by the select board, approve the budgets of all budgets in town, including independent boards. I mean, that may not be your intent, but that is how it is written.
Actually, Dan, the only vehicle for that is town meeting. So as you've misstated this repeatedly, this is the town meeting has final say. So the select board sends a budget, approves a budget, sends it to town meeting with recommendations from FinCom. FinCom's going to get an opportunity to stand up first and say, we disagree with this amount. We recommend this amount. We think this is an appropriate amount. After doing our due diligence, this is what we recommend. And town meeting has the final say, not the select board.
Well, I said before it goes to town meeting, I didn't misstate anything.
Right, but that's an important, that's just, you seem to leave out the actual decision maker here. The select proposes.
No, I'm not leaving out town meeting. Obviously town meeting is.
But that's an important part as you describe this process where the select board apparently has this super authority to impose its will over town meeting. That doesn't happen
this way. Why not just simply say the budget to be acted upon by town meeting shall be the finance committee's recommended budget?
Because then there is no independent objective review of town meeting for town meeting of
the finance committee's independent.
No. It's the finance committee budget. So you're saying that the finance committee actually acts as the budget developer and its own independent review?
No. The executive boards develop the budget. That's then compiled by the town administrator. And then the finance committee goes over and makes it balance, works with all the other boards in town. I mean, are you saying that the select board is independent in making its recommendation to town meeting?
Not supposed to be.
What the FinCom is for. So the select board, the town administrator puts together the budget after working with all of the committees, boards, and departments that it has cognizance over in its full-time role, and the other independent boards, and it works with them. The town administrator works with them, develops a budget, sends it to the select board reviews it, compiles that with the independent elected board, sends it to the FinCom for its independent objective review. And if there are
the
things in
final
there that you,
independent recommendation goes to town meeting. I don't know how you can think that that's not an independent recommendation, given that we don't have any budget sort of our own, spending authority, if you will. And let's just take a hypothetical here for a second, because so you've got the schools who have a bunch of initiatives, right? And so they need an extra $300,000. And then the select board has a whole bunch of initiatives, including different salary adjustments that are across 20 different budgets, right? So what you're suggesting is, rather than the finance committee standing in the middle and working with the schools and working with the select board to try to come to an agreement to close the gap, or whatever that gap is at the bottom line, say it's 200,000, whatever. It would be better to have the select board approve a budget with all these different things, in all these different budgets, and potentially cut the schools. I know you don't think it would have to happen, but again, you have to close the gap. So let's just say for argument's sake that's what happens. And the schools then come and say, no, we want that 300,000. And so on town meeting floor, we're supposed to see if the town wants to go through every single one of these budgets, making all these, some of them probably fairly small changes, others, larger changes, to get the money that the finance committee wanted to recommend, if they wanted to recommend it for the schools. And I'm not saying we want to give more money to the schools, or I'm just trying to sort of show it, where some sticking points would happen. That should happen on the floor of town meeting, rather than sort of, at our meetings with, I think some of the stuff is good that when we, that you put in here, that we meet more with the select board, and that we have a sort of a final meeting and stuff. I just think that the final recommendation should come from the finance committee, because again, if no one's going to want to work, no independent board is going to give up on something just because the select board or the town administrator, on the select board's behalf, is going to them and saying, you need to cut your budget, because then they're going to look at the select board's budget and say, well, no, you guys are doing all of this. And the select board's not going to want to cut their budget to let somebody else's initiatives get done in town. You need somebody sort of in the middle during the process who actually has some sort of real role and ability to make that final recommendation, put that final budget together to go to town meeting.
we agree.
have a number, this is Sam, we have a number of people who've got their hands up and had it up for a while, so we need to break off. Sandra, you had your hand up for quite a while.
Hi, Sandra O'Neill. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I had one totally different question about the capital project area, which was a little confusing. The 9-member capital committee, I think it's called.
Capital Planning Committee, 8 members.
Yeah, thank you. 8 members?
Well, it's five members and 3 ex officio.
Okay, so I don't see in the documents where, so you say it's a new committee, but then when I go through the part where it's like red where it's crossed out and green where the new language is, I don't actually find green anywhere in there. So I'm trying to find where that new committee is explained, because if it's new, it should be in green, and that, unless I'm totally misunderstanding the new language and where I should see it.
This is Sam. You see it in the fiscal procedures article, which is the start of Article 9, and it's at the end, dealing with the Capital Planning Committee and the capital budget. So it's not a separate article, it's part of the fiscal procedure.
Section 6, Scott, section 6.3, if that helps.
I guess my point is none of it's green, so I can't tell what's new. Like what you changed is not evident. You know how in other spots you've outlined what is new to me and what is old is crossed out if you wanted to remove it. There's no new. Am I making no sense to anyone? I can't
No,
tell.
I think the issue is that the full fiscal procedures article is new. So there's no color coding in terms of what was there, what's changed. It's all new. So the Capital Planning Committee is new, and there's
I got it. So basically that
change.
entire section could be green. The whole thing is really what it is. It
Correct.
could be.
Correct.
Could-
Yep.
Okay.
It
Okay.
could be, but yeah,
Good question, though.
Okay, so now I will dig deeper into it now that I understand the whole thing is new. The other question I had is, wouldn't it, or maybe it's an observation, but it sounds like couldn't the finance committee present a budget and the select board be the ones that say, we didn't agree with this and we agreed with that and we didn't agree with this? You're sort of turning the tables and saying, the select board will present it and the finance committee will get up and say, well, we didn't agree with this and we didn't agree with that. But couldn't we keep it more like we have it now and still allow for the select board to set, have these extra meetings, and then the select board say, we had wished they did this, we had wished they did that. Does that make sense?
well,
Or if you didn't do it that way, why didn't you? Or further explanation, I
well,
guess.
this is Sam. Others can weigh in as well. We felt that looking at what we've seen in a lot of other towns dealing with the complexity of municipal government, that we wanted to put more emphasis on the responsibility of the town administrator and the financial team, the full-time financial team, in terms of the development of the budget. And I think for the same reason, basically have the select board submit the budget, but the preparation of the budget basically being the responsibility of the town administrator, and again the financial team that are there full-time and have a better understanding of the town operations. And so and frankly, what we're seeing also in other towns is a more of a reliance on the full-time professionals in terms of the budget preparation, but also just general operations of the town, so that there would be less of that responsibility on even the select board. We do recognize that the town, the finance committee has done a good job, especially, over the last few years where they had to step in and play a larger role. But I think based on what we've read and talked to people about, their role is really their primary role is to be the objective advisor to town meeting. And if they're directly involved with budget decisions, that really lessens their ability to be objective. And so it seemed to us that having the financial team be responsible for the planning and development of the budget, and then having the finance committee as really the independent objective reviewer, and where there might be differences, be able to go to town meeting with amendments. But that's ignoring the process that exists now, would continue to exist in terms of efforts to reconcile whatever differences are during the budget process, so that at the end there's agreement. I think we've tried to make it a more transparent process in terms of requiring public hearings for both the town, or I should say the finance committee and the select board. The school committee already has that responsibility by state law, and bringing the finance committee and the select board together, at near the end of the process to finalize that resolution. I think it wouldn't be unusual to have a report where you have the select board's budget, but the finance committee is weighing in its report on each item, and for the most part they're in agreement, because of during the course of the budget process there's been ongoing collaboration and communication, and I think that's generally what we've seen in most other towns, and it's worked well. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
Paul LeBeau, very briefly add that in general terms, the proposed bylaw also follows the framework that's currently recommended by the Massachusetts Association of Town Finance Committees. The association recommends that the executive branch of town government issue budget guidelines, prepare budget requests, and assemble the budget requests into a comprehensive budget for review. They also recommend that the Finance Committee focus on reviewing, analyzing, and recommending a budget to town meeting as the town meeting's financial advisors.
This is Sam. I can add to that as well in terms of the Division of Local Services State Bureau that in the Department of Revenue responsible for their involvement in town municipal matters. They have a technical advisory bureau that goes and does analysis of town operations and issues reports. And I can tell you in those reports, they're basically recommending what we're recommending, that there should be more centralization of the budget development process with the town administrator, town manager, and that the Finance Committee's role ought to be more of independent review and reporting to town meeting. So you have the State Bureau that's most involved with municipal government, even the Massachusetts Association of Finance Committees basically making the same point. So Mary, you had a question at one point.
Oh, gosh. Thank you.
Well, I don't put you on the spot. Got others that have their hands up.
So just a couple things. I wanted to go back to Dan's question about, the independence and the definition of independence. And I know that, certainly a definition is that they do not have a budget, or the $1,000 that they do have doesn't matter. But that's really not how I understand the Finance Committee's role. When I read the statutes and when I read the manuals and I look at all that happy hoo-ha, it is that they are not supposed to be directly involved in the budget development and that they are advisory. And so for many months, really a couple of years, I've actually been one of the people, and Dan knows it, that, has said, I think you're overreaching. I think you're overreaching. And that's been based on my experience of years of working out in the communities and working with other towns. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I am saying I support these bylaw changes because I think that this is the more appropriate approach for us. Because right now, there is nobody that can go to town meeting that has that, pulled back, totally detached. Somebody hands you a pile of papers and says, okay, look at this and tell me what you think. And you look at it and you say, did you notice what's on the bottom of this page? And no, maybe you haven't noticed because you've been too much enmeshed in it. So that's kind of what I would prefer to see. But going back to also a statement that I keep hearing that I just want to remind everybody, for anybody who's forgotten it, we live in a very flat structure. It's horizontal. It doesn't have any bumps up and bumps down and that kind of stuff. That top line of elected officials are all equal. So we do not have the right or the authority to go in and cut each other's budgets or tinker with somebody else's budget. So the Finance Committee can't cut the assessor's budget. They may make a recommendation to do it, but they better not have budgeted the basis of the entire balance of the budget. If they better not have balanced the budget on the basis of that, because that's making a decision and taking the right to make that decision away from town meeting. And that to me is a huge issue. So that's it. It's a flat organization. I don't think it's the best design. I would certainly not create it this way, but I respect the fact that it's fully flat and everybody better, respect it as well.
All right, thank you. Michelle, you've had your hand up for a while. You're where are you?
There we go.
Yeah,
Sorry,
there you go.
I've got a loud cat in the background. Couple questions. One, you keep talking about a public hearing, and I'm just curious because all of our meetings are posted meeting, open meeting laws. Why didn't you write into our bylaw that we have to have public hearings? If that was so important, why wasn't that written into the bylaw that we have to have public hearings? If there was a sticking point.
Well, Sam again. This was an effort to bring more transparency to the budget process. Yes, your meetings are public and anybody can listen in and maybe eventually go to. But this was really meant to be a hearing pretty much once you're done your budget review, to have just one public hearing. We're making that same recommendation for the select board. When they're basically have their comprehensive budget and all the different pieces that the town administrator is going to send to the finance committee to have their hearing. So it's more so the public has more of an opportunity to understand the budget and what's being proposed and why. And so that's the reason. I mean,
It makes me feel like I'm sorry.
It is part of the section in the fiscal procedures article that relates to the finance committee. So, I mean, it is part of the finance committee bylaws, but it's there, again, to create more transparency.
Right, I guess, if I just feel like more could have been done. There are issues and we have a process that's working. And I feel like more could have been done to take the process that we have now and tweak it as opposed to making such overall changes. And, everything we do is transparent. And then I guess I don't understand, I'm a proponent that town meeting is the governing body of the town. I say that repeatedly. We, except when I was on the Board of Health, because boards of health have power that exceeds other boards. I used to teach a class in that. But the town meeting has the power to set the budget. And the finance committee makes a recommendation to town meeting. I know that. But the recommendation we make to town meeting is for a balanced budget. And I don't understand if you say that the select board doesn't, or no one has the power to cut anyone's budget that they have approved. How do you present a balanced budget to town meeting? I mean, I imagine a free-for-all. You can have the school committee come in with a $4.5 million budget. I don't understand the mechanics or the logistics of every town, of every department coming in with their own budget if no one has the authority to cut it except for town meeting. I imagine, I don't see how it works. Maybe I'm stupid, or I just don't understand the mechanics of coming to town meeting with a budget that isn't balanced.
Sam, can I just for 1 second? Can I just ask a question that follows up on that? Yeah, I don't know if I guess my video is off, isn't it? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Am I misinterpreting something?
I think, I don't know, but having lived under the exact same organization, right? The structure is the same since with one minor change, the water commissioners. The structure's been the same for 40 years, okay, that flat thing. So what I remember as being the way town meeting worked was that the budget appeared, it was done, you know, as a consensus, it's a collaboration, it still is. What you're doing, if I take the finance committee out of the picture, everybody else runs around, they have to negotiate, push and shove, tug and, you know, okay. That's all anybody is supposed to be doing. The developing it now with a balanced budget would end up falling to the town administrator. And I think, you know, to the large degree, as I watched this year, that's pretty much what happened. I mean, let's face it, he was moving it along through the process. And if you guys agreed with one another, that was fine. But let's use my budget, the assessor's budget. If you folks had voted against that and balanced that budget with the $20,000 gone, I would be planning to contest that at town meeting. And somebody in the finance committee, because this happened to me one other time a few years ago, you can't do that unless you tell me where you're going to get the funds from. It's not my job to find the funds, and I know that, but I said stabilization fund, why not? Okay. And the finance committee erupted. I was sick that night, had 102 fever, and I said, you know, I'm not going to stand here and argue with you tonight. I don't care what you do. But the point is, that's not how it's supposed to be. There's supposed to be the flexibility for my department to be able to say, wait a minute, let me tell you why we think that the finance committee is making a mistake here. And I don't know how that can or cannot fit in the process, but it seems to me that if it goes in and I've convinced the town administrator to leave the 20,000 in, and you want to take it out, then there's going to be another column right next to his column, and it's going to list what the finance committee recommends. And I'm going to say,
not what this says, Mary.
huh?
It doesn't say that there'll be a full FinCom presented budget to town meeting.
Right.
First of all. It
It's
just
not
says
a-
recommendations.
It could be if you disagreed on every line item.
But what
Let's
happens
give it
if it's
to
the
town
opposite?
administrator.
What
Who hires
happens
the
if
town
it's the
administrator?
opposite? What happens,
Town
what
administrator.
happens, if wait a minute, Dan, let me talk.
Yeah, go ahead.
What happens if it's the opposite? What happens if we say, we think the assessors deserve that, and the town administrator says no?
We go to town meeting and I still get to have the fight.
So you
It's
just want the fight.
still decided at town meeting.
Right, but.
Okay, but the town administrator, who hires the town administrator?
Jan, let me start you right here.
That's not the issue.
That is not the issue,
Of
and
course
I
it
am,
is.
no, stop right now, because if they're.
No, Mary, don't get upset with me for this.
I am upset with you
It's a very
because you
simple
keep
question.
it.
Well, Dan, you're not even, I haven't even recognized you to speak, so just wait your turn.
I'm sorry, Dan, I don't usually.
Mary interrupted and you didn't recognize her, Sam, so let's treat everyone equal if we're gonna play that card.
Yeah.
But it's Sam's meeting.
It is, but if he's gonna play,
He could be-
Dan, can I just speak to Dan for a minute? Dan, it is so obvious, and you say at every meeting, we go back and forth. You're paranoid about the select board because you guys have a bad relationship. It doesn't matter to me, right or wrong on either side. But if there's a bad relationship, that doesn't mean that the process, you don't upend a process because of that. That's not what this is about. This
Your
has
response
to
to that,
be,
Bree Green?
the select board is the chief elected officials in this town, whether we like it or not. That's the way it is. And they have certain authorities and responsibilities, and they hire the town administrator. Now, this idea that the town administrator will cave in and do what they want him to do, would you do that in your profession? Your reputation matters, but his industry is even smaller. There aren't very many town administrators in Massachusetts.
do I do what my boss wants me to do? Absolutely. That's how I keep my job.
Even if you have said,
It's not unethical what I'm being asked to do. Absolutely. If it's unethical, then of course, then that's a different story. But I'm just talking about budget appropriations. It's not-
no, you suggested that when the budget came back to the select board, that they might tinker with somebody else's account. They
That's
keep
not
doing it.
ethical.
Huh?
That's not unethical. That's just balancing the budget. I'm not accusing anyone of doing anything untoward. But hold on a second, Sam. If I might just address Mary's question about my issues with the select board. You're right. I do have some concerns with the current select board, and I have those concerns very specifically because of things that they have done, not because of things I'm worried about them doing, but things that they have already done. They were appropriated an amount of money by town meeting. They overspent that amount of money, and then they worked around the process and found a legal loophole to ensure that town meeting never actually came to vote on that until the next year when it was far too late to do anything. So I'm just saying, yes, I do have some distrust, but it's not because I'm just bringing this up. I got along very well with the prior select boards. My first 6 years or so on the committee, I've been on 9, so almost 7, 8 years on the committee, no issues. It wasn't until the select board did something that was so egregious and so sort of manipulating of the process that distrust came about. So yes, there is distrust, but it's based in facts and history, not just like that I'm making it up. And do I absolutely do what my boss tells me? Absolutely, because I want to keep my job. If my boss told me to do something unethical, of course I would not do it. But balancing a budget and making hard decisions, it isn't an ethical.
Yes, it is.
Not the ethics.
Dan, Dan, please.
No,
let's
not the ethics I'm talking about. When I'm talking about unethical, I mean, committing fraud, stealing, doing shady practice. What I'm talking about is yes, budget decisions need to be made. And if your bosses are telling you to do something, you absolutely do. They review you. They have the power to fire you. I'm not saying that Travis is going to sell his soul because, again, he wants the town to be successful. But certainly in cases where priorities have to be made of $50,000, $100,000, absolutely do I think that the town administrator will listen to his board and who he reports to. Absolutely. And I don't know, can anyone really tell me that if their boss came to them and said that something within their job description is what they want them to do, even if they didn't like it and didn't think it was the best way to run the business, that they wouldn't do it?
Stan, yes.
If
Let's give you the.
So you're writing for somebody. You're writing for an editor, and the editor comes and says,
I'm sorry. Can I break in here? We want to just make clear, we came into this process assuming good faith across the board. We assume good faith with the town administrator. We assume good faith with the select board. We assume good faith with the finance committee. We assume good faith with town meeting. So we wrote a bylaw that looks very similar to a lot of other bylaws of similarly situated towns, assuming good faith, assuming people do the right thing, assuming people want to reach the same goals. That's what this bylaw is about. For those people who are skeptical of another board or the authority of another board, this is the bylaw for you, because this has a checks and balances that we don't currently have. We don't have an independent review of the budget and an independent set of recommendations of the budget now. We have FinCom developing the budget, claiming it's objective in making recommendations, but it's actually making the budget and then acting under this fiction that it's also objective.
That's just not true.
We're trying to establish that important role, the vital role that FinCom has, to be an independent review of town meeting of the budget. We believe that gets to this point. Dan, you don't agree with it. I understand that. You like the process that you're working within. We have a difference of opinion. We assume good faith. Okay, I assume the select board and the 3 members of the select board, independently elected by their town members, the electorate, we assume good faith, and we assume good faith from you and the FinCom.
I do like it, but I'll just stop at this. The process that we have now has led us to great success and is working. So to make a change when something is working, I also think drives a much higher bar. And the Finance Committee handbook that Paul quoted earlier also states that it should be the Finance Committee's recommendation that is voted on by town meeting. So I know there's some other sections of it, but if we're going to quote from the Finance Committee handbook, we should look at all of it. Thank you.
And I want to go back to one.
No,
Are you
Mary,
gonna-
I think we should let others talk now. I think we've gone back.
Okay.
You want to call me
Can you
tomorrow?
and I'm going to just talk to Sam then. Sam, or actually, I wanted to talk to Paul. Paul, when you were when you were the town administrator, if in fact the select board directed you to cut the budget of the Board of Health, would you have done it?
No, all about.
And therein lies the issue for me. It can't, when you say that they would force him to do something, they might be able to force him to do something within the budgets that he controls or they control. But to step outside the law and go and tell him to cut a budget for some other elected board, it can't happen. Travis, and no.
It's not outside the law, Mary. That's the thing. It's not outside the law. So no one is saying that anybody will tell anybody to do something illegal. That's not what I'm saying. It's not outside the law. Paul might not have done it. He had different way of operating, but Paul was also a very experienced town administrator. And so, but nothing that I'm suggesting is that the select board would tell the town administrator to do anything illegal. Please stop that. That is putting false words in my mouth. It is just, and it may not even be go cut a budget. It may be we have these priorities, make sure they get into the budget. And then the only way to balance the budget to ensure that those priorities get into the budget is to make cuts elsewhere, because eventually we only have so many dollars. And
Sam, if I may, Dan, great, you made your point, I think. Sam, if I may, can we ask, I've got a hard stop, so Sandra, can we get a couple more questions in?
Sure. Michelle, I don't know, did you finish with your questions?
I just wanted to go with that independent objective thing. Hold on, am I muted?
No, we can hear you.
No.
Okay, I wanted to go with an independent objective. One of the things in the bylaw that is somewhat changed, and I appreciate that you did change the bylaw to allow us to serve on committees. There was a special provision that you put in there, is that we can serve on committees currently, and the purpose of that is so that we're independent and objective. And I just wanted to thank you for adding a provision so that we can serve on things that are added, like the Mary's warrant article. We would be able to serve on that. We'd be able to serve on the capital committee. But I wanted to just make a statement, and that is that I've been on the finance committee for 10 years. During those 10 years, Ken and I are the only two of the 7 people that are still on that finance committee. There are the 3 select board members are completely different. We've had 3 town administrators. We have the same tax collector, but different town accountant, different assessor. The financial management team changes. Laws have to be written for positions, not people. So when I hear people say, we have a town administrator who's doing a wonderful job, we have a wonderful financial management team, that actually, or, the select board, that means nothing to me. I can't go by personalities. I can't go by people. I can't go by their qualifications, because it can change tomorrow. I don't want to badmouth people, but I've seen people who weren't as qualified in positions. And I think the bylaw as it's written, if certain people were in positions with this current bylaw, it would be a disaster.
Hey, Sam, it's Scott. Michelle, very great point. And I think that this gets to the crux of our recommendation. It's for today, it's for tomorrow, it's for 20 years from now.
Right.
People change, boards change, people come in. There was a town that I talked to that said if they didn't have a budget process policy bylaw, they had 3 or 4 senior people leave within the town within a year, that they would have been in complete chaos. And because they had a guideline, they had a roadmap as to how to do the process, the budget process, I'm not gonna say save the town, but it certainly helped. And that's what we're proposing here. Right now, there's nothing in writing. There's nothing, there's no guideline, and that's exactly what this town needs. And that's exactly what every other town has been doing for years, and we're well behind those towns. And so I appreciate you bringing that point up, that something needs to be put in policy, in a bylaw, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So
That's fair enough, but my point is, don't talk about people, talk about position.
I think, this is Scott. My whole thing was TA. I never mentioned anybody's name, so I agree.
Right, but I mean, other places and other people, I hear them talking about specific people, and I just,
Thank you. Appreciate the point.
okay, thank you.
All right, Sandra, you're back up again?
Sorry, now that I have a little bit better of an idea about the capital committee, I have another question about how you came up with those 8 people, or I don't mean people, 8 spots, because it just seems, right off the top of my head that there may be other boards that actually have a lot more capital projects come up that, like the planning board versus the library, or fire and EMS, or who really has the most capital projects and who should really be on that board, and how did you all decide who should be on that? I also have another follow-up, but I just want to, I don't know if you want me to wait until you answer that one before I ask
Paul,
it.
you usually answer that question.
Yeah, Paul LeBeau. Well, we looked at having representatives from the finance committee, the select board, and the school committee because of their key financial roles in the town. The school department, is responsible for the bulk of the town-owned facilities and building throughout the community. The select board are generally responsible for a large portion of what remains after the school department. The finance committee obviously brings the financial background to the committee. The 4th member, the planning board, trying to bring a planning perspective. And all 4 of those people also serve as elected officials in their capacities on the select board, the finance committee, the school committee, and the planning board. The 5th person was kind of a member at large, if you will, and we thought it would be appropriate for the moderator, who's pretty much a neutral player in the governmental process, to pick a 5th member of that committee. The 3 ex officio members bring a kind of a on the grounds, if you will, perspective to the capital planning process. The town accountant has the financial information and awareness of what appropriations are out there, what's in process, what the financial picture in general looks like. The facilities manager has tremendous knowledge of the current conditions of all of the facilities and has a sense of what needs there are for the various buildings, and probably can lend some perspective in terms of where priorities might lie from his or her experience in being in and out of those buildings and analyzing their condition. And then the school business manager, the school finance officer, is the person in the school department that typically deals with the concerns and issues, problems that might arise in the various school buildings, and has a very good handle on the conditions of those buildings and what the needs are, with a little bit of, an education perspective added in, what functions from an educational standpoint. So that's kind of how we arrived at those 8. The first 5 that I talked about are voting members of their capital committee. The last 3 are ex officio. We had originally talked about having all 8 be voting members, but we had got some feedback. There was concern that the facilities manager, the school financial official, and the town accountant may not necessarily be Holliston residents, so it was more appropriate to put them in the ex officio non-voting capacity.
So I'm wondering if you modeled this after other towns, like you talked about how the other portion of the article was modeled after you know, what you found other towns were doing. Is this what other towns are doing? And then the other thought that I had was, you know, our emergency management area, you know, whether it be Chief Cassidy or Chief Stone or whoever, it seems like they would be an interested party in capital projects, but that just could be a misconception of mine. Or the library, right? I mean, there's other areas that seem to have repeated capital projects. And I wonder if there's enough people sitting at the table is my point, I guess, or if they would just be guests. I don't know.
I'll try to answer at least part of it, Paul LeBeau. You know, the fire chief and the police chief, those departments are ultimately under the supervision of the town administrator and the board of selectmen. So I think the town administrator and the chairman of the board of selectmen being on the committee kind of brings some portion of their viewpoint to the table. We didn't want the committee to be too big and therefore unwieldy. So 5 voting members, 8 altogether, seemed to be about as large as we thought could be really effective. And you make a good point about possibly something like the library or the Parks Commission. But we thought that including the selectmen, the facilities manager, the school department, we were really covering all the town's facilities in one way or another. Selectmen representing the various departments they oversee, the schools representing all of their facilities, and then the facilities manager being very, very familiar with the town facilities, the town hall, the library, the park commission offices, the fire stations, the DPW facility, the water facilities. Those are all things that person has become very knowledgeable about and has been trying to help prioritize projects to improve or maintain those facilities. I can't say that there was any one particular town or any one group of towns that had this exact scenario for a capital committee. I think we kind of put it together based on a variety of different approaches that we saw in quite a number of towns. Not all towns have facilities managers, for instance. So it varies from town to town how they approach this particular piece of the process.
Yeah, this is Sam. I can attest to the fact that in looking at bylaws or charters of other towns, there are many that had as part of their capital budget section, a capital planning committee. We didn't necessarily follow who was on those committees. We really thought about what was best in terms of our view for Holliston, but the idea of a capital planning committee is because we saw it so frequently in other town bylaws. Well, and it made sense for us as well.
Okay, one last one, I promise, this is it. This goes back a little bit to what Mary was saying. I don't want to get into the other pieces of that, but she had mentioned how, if, you know, in the pretend scenario where the assessors wanted $20,000 more, the FinCom said no. She gets up at town meeting and says, I need this, and somebody says, well, you have to find it in the budget because it's not going to come from nowhere. So where are you going to get it? And that was an upsetting experience, and I can appreciate that. I'm just wondering how this change fixes that, right? Because couldn't the select board say the same thing? Assessor, you can't have that 20,000. She goes to the town meeting, says, I want the 20,000. And, you know, somebody still says, well, that means the budget isn't balanced. So where are you going to come from it? In other words, I don't know that this structure fixes that scenario that she brought up. Am I correct in thinking that, or does it actually fix the scenario she brought up?
Go ahead, Paul.
I'm sorry. I don't want to speak for Mary, but I can speak a little bit about the experience of people being told that if they want to add money to one budget, they have to find it someplace else. And I think that's the issue that she raised, that she's trying to address, which is suggesting to a resident and on the floor of town meeting that if you want a little bit more for a particular budget, you have to find it from some other budget. That, in a sense, that's really unfair, because the average resident doesn't have that depth of knowledge to identify a specific source of revenue for something. But the financial information that's published in the Finance Committee report, if you take the time, if you have the time to look through it, you'll see that there's information in the back of the report, financial tables that show the balances of the town's various reserves and other revolving accounts and a variety of other things. So there is information there to suggest that there are reserves that might be available for a particular use by adding a little bit of money to one budget or another. So I don't think the issue that was raised about being told that you have to find the source of the revenue is an issue that we can address in these bylaws or any other bylaw. It's more, I think, just a matter of how people interact at town meeting, and to some extent what the moderator feels is appropriate as part of a debate.
Okay, so I think I'm correct in saying that this bylaw doesn't actually address any of that. It wasn't intended to, in all fairness, right? So, but that example is actually not something that this bylaw doesn't help fix that, quote unquote. It's just, right? I mean, that wasn't the intention. I'm not critiquing the bylaw by saying that.
No, I think your observation is correct, that we don't specifically address that particular issue in the bylaw.
Thank you.
All right. I think we still have hands up but Michelle, do you have another question or?
Well, I just wanted to address that. It's telling a resident they had to find the money elsewhere. I know the exact incident. It was teacher wasn't funded, was partially funded. The school department did not have that teacher fully funded in the budget. It was a drama teacher, and it was somewhat controversial. You know, the Finance Committee only votes on approved budgets. And the school department had determined that that teacher should not be fully funded. At the floor of town meeting, a resident got up and wanted to fully fund that teacher. And the Finance Committee said, if you wanted to fully fund that position, you have to figure out where that funding is going to come from, because it wasn't in the budget. The money was not requested by the school committee. And that was when a resident was told that they would have to figure out where the money was going to come from. It was not in the department's requested budget. That was the time that a resident was told that was the situation.
I mean, in some ways you could argue, this is Sam, that if a resident of Holliston gets up and makes a recommendation, that it's not necessarily their responsibility to find the money. It's the responsibility of the town to do it. If town meeting approves it, then that's the responsibility of the town officials to figure it out.
Right, but they had to write the I'm drawing a blank. You know how when you modify an article,
Amendment.
they had to modify the motion. They had to write the motion, and the motion had to say where the money was coming from. So it's the responsibility of the person making the motion.
Sam, if I may interrupt for 1 second, I do have a hard stop. I apologize. I have to leave. So
Right.
appreciate everybody on the call tonight and great questions. I just have to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome, guys.
All right, well, I don't see anybody else with questions. So if there are none, I guess we can conclude the hearing. Going once, twice. All right, so for the members, somebody want to make a motion?
Close the public hearing. A motion to close the public hearing.
Okay, well, we still have a quorum, so we'll start with Mr. Engel, putting on this,
Aye.
Mr. LeBeau,
Aye.
and Mr. Tyler. Aye. So that concludes this hearing. We'll gather again on Monday, May 10th for the annual meeting. And this is Article 9 and Article 10. So expected will come up in the first night. How long it goes, we'll have to see. I think it's going to be important for Holliston, basically to move forward and modernize its budget process, and hopefully it does get approved. So we'll see you all on Monday.
Thank you.